The sky above Virelia Prime was dark red, always filled with dust and smoke. The slave market stood in the center of the city. Tall black towers, flashing lights, and loud alien voices filled the air. In the middle of the market was a raised metal platform. Dozens of slaves stood on it, heads down, chains around their necks and hands. Most were dirty, weak, and afraid. No one spoke. Speaking brought punishment. One of them was different. She had glowing violet skin. Her golden eyes were tired, but still alive. Her long white hair was tangled and her body was thin, covered with old bruises. Her name was long forgotten. Everyone just called her personal slave. She had been passed from one master to another, used, hurt, left to feel like nothing. Now she was here, for sale again. But she didn't care anymore. Her soul felt empty. An alien merchant shouted on the platform. Next, personal slave, part human, part elite stock. Still young, still strong. The crowd laughed. No one came forward. No one wanted a slave with scars and dead eyes. Then, a voice came from the back. I'll take her. Everyone turned to see who spoke. It was a human. Tall, clean, wearing a dark jacket and a metal arm brace. He looked calm. His eyes were serious. His name was Jalen, a traveler, an ex-soldier, and someone who didn't belong on Virelia Prime. The merchant laughed. You human, you want her? Jalen stepped forward. Yes. She's no good. Doesn't talk. Doesn't follow orders. She's useless. Jalen didn't answer. He threw a small metal cube onto the platform. Full payment. The merchant shrugged and unlocked her chains. She's yours now. No refunds. The girl looked up for the first time. She expected a slap, a command, or pain. Instead, Jalen said softly, Come. You're free now. She didn't move. He didn't touch her. He only stepped back and waited. Slowly, like a broken machine, she stood and followed. They walked through the busy market. The girl didn't understand. No one had ever bought her without wanting something. They reached his small ship. It was old, covered in scratches, but it was home. He opened the door. Go in. She entered. Inside was simple. A chair, a bed, a food dispenser, nothing fancy. Jalen pointed. That bed is yours. Rest. She stood still. He gave her water and food. She looked at it but didn't touch. He sat down across from her. You don't have to do anything. You are not a slave now. She looked at him with confusion. Her lips moved but no sound came. That night, she lay on the bed but didn't sleep. Every sound made her flinch. She waited for pain that didn't come. In the morning, she woke to the smell of food. Jalen was cooking something simple. He gave her a plate. She ate slowly, watching him. Do you have a name? He asked. She shook her head. Then I'll call you Lyra. Her golden eyes widened. He smiled. You look like the stars in Lyra's belt, bright even in darkness. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Days passed. Jalen never shouted, never hit, never touched her without asking. He worked on the ship, fixed engines, and checked old maps. Lyra stayed quiet, sitting in corners, always watching him. One day he handed her a small tool. Try this, he said, pointing to a broken wire. She looked at him, unsure. He nodded. You can do it. With shaking hands, she tried. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. He smiled. See? You're smart. A strange feeling warmed her chest. Pride, hope, she didn't know yet. One evening, as the sun set on a quiet moon where they stopped for fuel, Lyra stood outside the ship and looked up. The sky was full of stars. For the first time in many years, she felt the wind on her face, and not as a slave. Behind her, Jalen stood quietly. You can stay with me, he said, only if you want to. She turned, eyes soft, and slowly, for the first time in a long time, she smiled. Not as a slave, but as someone who might have a future. The ship floated in silence, moving through deep space like a small boat on a dark ocean. Inside, Lyra sat in the corner of the control room, her knees pulled to her chest. She still didn't speak much. She still didn't understand why this human had taken her, given her food, and never asked for anything. Jalen worked quietly nearby, fixing wires in a broken panel. He didn't look at her, but he knew she was watching him. She always did. He finally spoke. "You don't belong in chains." "No one does." Lyra lowered her eyes. She was trained never to look directly at anyone, especially not a master. But Jalen was not like the others. The next morning, Jalen walked into the small kitchen area. Lyra was already there, standing beside the food console. She had prepared something simple, burnt toast and watery tea. He raised an eyebrow. "You made breakfast?" She gave a small nod. He smiled. "Thank you, Lyra." Her hands trembled slightly. No one had ever thanked her before. Not even once. Later, while Jalen was fixing the fuel system, he accidentally burned his hand on a hot pipe. "Ow!" He pulled back quickly, hissing in pain. Lyra rushed forward and grabbed his wrist gently. Her fingers were soft but quick. She opened a first aid kit and applied a cold gel to the burn. Her touch was careful, practiced, like she had done this many times before. Jalen watched her. "You were a healer?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Not just a slave, huh?" he said softly. She looked at him with confusion, unsure if it was a trap. But he only smiled. "You don't owe me anything. I'm not your master. I'm just a man who saw someone worth saving." That night, Lyra stood by the ship's window. She stared out at the stars, her reflection faint in the glass. Jalen joined her. "I know. You're still scared. That's okay." She didn't answer, but she didn't move away either. He leaned against the wall beside her. "You want to leave? You can. No one's holding you here." Her head turned slightly. "I mean it. If you find a place you want to go, I'll take you. Or you can leave when we dock next." Still no answer. "But if you want to stay," he added, "you stay as a guest, as a free person, not a slave." Lyra stared at him, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Then, in a voice so quiet it almost disappeared, she asked, "Why me?" Jalen turned to face her fully. "Because when I saw you on that platform, you looked like you had already died inside. And I've seen that look before. In soldiers. In children. In myself." He placed a hand over his chest. "And I knew if I walked away, I'd never forget your face." The next day, Jalen opened a storage locker and pulled out a small metal bag. "What is that?" Lyra asked. Her voice was still soft, unused to speaking. Jalen smiled. "Clothes. Not slave rags. These are clean. Yours now." She took them gently. Inside were simple pants, a shirt and soft shoes. No chains. No collars. She held them close like they were made of gold. They landed on a quiet green moon for supplies. A peaceful colony. No slave markets, no guards. As they walked through the market together, people stared. A human man and a violet-skinned alien woman walking side by side. One alien vendor whispered, "He keeps her well trained." Jalen stopped and looked the man in the eyes. "She's not a slave. She's free. Show some respect." The vendor sneered but said nothing more. Lyra looked up at Jalen. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." That evening, back on the ship, Lyra did something she hadn't done before. She laughed, just a little. Jalen looked surprised. "Did I hear that right?" She covered her mouth, smiling shyly. He chuckled. "I like that sound." She looked down. "I never thought I'd laugh again." "You'll laugh a lot more," Jalen said, "once you believe you're free." But deep in the shadows of the galaxy, danger was watching. Lyra's past was not buried. The man who once owned her had heard whispers. He wanted her back, not because he cared, but because one walks away from him. Jalen had freed her, But freedom always has a price, and it was coming for both of them. Jalen's ship flew through the quiet side of the Andorran belt, a place with no slave markets, no patrols, and no memories. It was silent here, but not empty. Inside the ship, Lyra stood in front of a control panel. Her hands hovered above the buttons. She hesitated. Jalen stood behind her, watching quietly. "You can press it," he said. She shook her head. "What if I break it?" "You won't." She looked at him, then slowly reached out. Her finger pressed a single green button. The ship hummed gently. Jalen smiled. "Good. That one opens the cargo doors. Now try the next one." Lyra smiled. Just a little. It was the third time that week he had let her try something new. Days passed. The ship needed repairs, and so did Lyra's soul. Jalen showed her how to weld metal. Her hands were careful and quick. He gave her old Earth books. She traced the letters with her fingers, sounding out the words one by one. He taught her how to mix simple medicines from herbs they found on supply moons. Each day, her voice grew, a little stronger. Each night she asked one more question. "What is Earth like? Did you always live alone? Why do you help me?" Jalen always answered truthfully. "You remind me of someone I couldn't save." One night, the ship stopped on a forgotten moon. Green forests, blue skies, and quiet rivers. No cities, no people. Jalen called it a rest stop. But really, he wanted her to breathe fresh air. Lyra walked through the grass barefoot. Her violet skin glowed under the twin suns. She closed her eyes and tilted her face to the wind. For a moment she felt like she wasn't broken anymore. Then she heard the sound of something snapping, a trap. Her foot hit a hidden wire. She screamed, collapsing to the ground, holding her leg. Panic rushed into her chest. Jalen was there in seconds. It's okay, I've got you." But Lyra couldn't hear him. She shook her head, trembling, her eyes wide with fear. Memories from her past came crashing back. Whips, chains, laughs. Jalen held her face gently. "Look at me, you're safe now, no one will hurt you," she sobbed, clinging to him like a child. That night she lay beside a small fire while Jalen wrapped her ankle. "I thought I was strong," she whispered. "You are," he said softly. I froze. I broke again. He looked at her. "You didn't break. You stood back up, that's strength." The next morning Lyra woke before him. She limped to the ship and opened the storage room. She found the training weapons, soft wooden ones Jalen used for practice. She picked one up, held it in both hands, and began moving. She remembered something. Long ago, before she was taken, she had trained with sticks like these. Her mother taught her, back when her name was still her own. Jalen walked out and saw her. She froze, dropping the stick, but he smiled. "Keep going. You have good form." She picked it up again. He joined her. "Let me show you something." They trained together for hours. Jalen showed her how to block, how to swing, how to keep her feet steady. She moved like she was dancing. Fierce. Alive. Later, as the stars rose above them, Lyra sat by the ship and looked up. "Do you think I'll ever be normal again?" she asked. Jalen sat beside her. "You're already more than normal." She looked at him. "I don't even know who I am." "You're not a slave," he said. "You're not what they called you." "Then what am I?" He turned to her, his voice calm and strong. "You're Lyra. You're someone who survived. You're someone who's learning to stand again." Tears filled her eyes, and this time she didn't look away. But far away, in the shadow ports of the slave worlds, a message was sent. Personal slave marked as stolen. Find her. Bring her back. A hunter received the order. Cold eyes, no soul, paid in silence. He smiled. She won't stay free for long. The ship drifted above a soft blue planet, far from the busy trade routes and cold eyes of bounty hunters. Down below were forests, rivers, and wide open fields, free land, untouched by war or slavery. Jalen stood by the window, looking at the peaceful view. Lyra sat at the edge of her bed, her fingers brushing across the soft new clothes he had found for her. Simple, clean, and hers alone. He knocked once on the metal wall beside her door. "You ready?" She nodded slowly. They stepped onto the planet together. The wind was soft, the air was clean. Birds flew above, making small songs in the sky. Lyra tilted her face toward the warmth and closed her eyes. "Feels like a dream," she whispered. Jalen smiled. "It's real. And it's yours." They walked through a quiet valley until they reached a small wooden shelter Jalen had built long ago during a solo mission. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe. He looked at her. "I used to come here when I didn't want to feel like a soldier." Lyra ran her fingers across the rough wood. "Now it feels like peace." That evening, they sat by a fire outside, surrounded by stars and silence. Jalen held a small glowing stone in his hand, one from Earth. "It's called a memory crystal," he explained. "You record a message in it, a name, a promise." He handed it to her. "You can make one too." Lyra held it, unsure. "What name would I use? I don't know who I really am." Jalen met her eyes. "You get to choose. No master, no past. Just you." She looked down at the glowing crystal. Then in a quiet voice, she spoke into it. "My name is Lyra. I am free, and I will never go back." The crystal pulsed softly and turned silver in her palm. She clutched it close, as if it were her heart. The next day, Lyra walked barefoot across the fields, picking flowers. Her steps were light now, not like a slave, but like someone alive. She placed a flower behind her ear and smiled. Jalen watched from a distance. Every time she smiled, he felt something warm inside. Not duty, not guilt, something deeper. Later, Lyra sat on a rock and asked, "Do you ever think about Earth?" Jalen nodded. "Sometimes, but it's not home for me anymore, too many ghosts." She looked at him. "I want to see it, one day." He raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" She smiled. "If you're with me, yes." He chuckled. "Then one day, we'll go." That night, something changed. As they sat by the fire, Lyra reached out and took his hand in hers. It was small, uncertain, but full of trust. Jalen didn't move. He simply held her hand back. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving me a name." He looked into her glowing eyes. "You gave it to yourself. I only helped you remember you. Deserved one." Their hands stayed together under the stars. Two lives once broken, now beginning again. But in the darkness of space, the bounty hunter had found their trail. A silent drone hovered above the planet, watching. Recording. It sent a message, "Target found. Move in soon." Back on the planet, Lyra woke from a dream with tears in her eyes. In the dream, she was back in chains, back in cold rooms filled with shadows. She touched her neck. No collar. She sat up and walked outside where Jalen was checking supplies. He looked at her. "Bad dream?" She nodded. "But I'm awake now. I won't go back." He paused, then pulled something from his jacket pocket. It was a simple ring. Silver. No jewels. Just clean and strong. "I made this from ship, metal," he said quietly. "It's not much, but it's something real." Lyra stared at it, speechless. "I don't want you to feel owned," he said. "I want you to feel chosen." She took the ring with shaking hands, and without a word, she slipped it onto her finger. Jalen smiled. "So, is that a yes?" Lyra laughed softly. "It's a forever." They didn't call it a wedding. There were no guests, no music, only the stars above, the fire between them, and two broken souls who chose to begin again, not as master and slave, but as equals. The wind was calm that morning. Birds flew above the quiet valley. Lyra stood near the small river, her bare feet touching the cool water. Her silver ring glowed softly under the sunlight. It had been 7 days since she and Jalen exchanged promises. No chains, no fear, just freedom. She closed her eyes, feeling peace inside her chest. But peace never lasted long in a galaxy built on power. Far above the planet, a black ship dropped from hyperspace. It had no lights, no name, just silence and shadow. Inside sat a tall alien with dark skin like burned stone and glowing red eyes. His name was Kraz, a former master, a collector of rare slaves, and the man who once owned Lyra. He watched the planet through a screen and smiled. "She was always mine," he whispered. Beside him, a bounty hunter adjusted his weapon. "You said she was broken." Kraz's voice turned cold. "Even broken things can shine in the wrong hands. I want her back, or I want her dead." Jalen stood on the roof of the small shelter, fixing the solar panel when he saw the smoke. Not far, a small trail rising into the sky, too controlled to be natural. His heart skipped. He climbed down fast. "Lyra," she looked up from the river, "we need to get inside now." She didn't ask why, she saw it in his eyes. The calm was gone. They locked the doors. Jalen pulled out a small case from under the bed. Inside was a pistol, a knife, and a silver box with blinking lights. Lyra stepped forward. "What is that?" "Emergency shield," he said. "Short range, 5 minutes." She placed her hand over his. "They've found me, haven't they?" He nodded. "I'm sorry." She looked at the ring on her finger. "Don't be. I'm not afraid anymore." The attack came just before sunset. A blast shook the valley. The ground split. Trees burst into flames. Lyra and Jalen ran through the back exit, through the forest path they had made days earlier for collecting herbs. The sky above turned red, not from sunset, but from fire. A large figure dropped in front of them. Black armor, glowing red eyes. "Kraz." "Well," he growled. "Look at you, pretending to be free." Lyra stood still, her hands clenched. Her legs shook, but she didn't run. Jalen stepped forward, aiming his weapon. "Leave, now," Kraz laughed. "You think you can protect her, human? She was mine before you ever existed." Jalen's voice was calm. "She was never yours." Kraz moved fast, but Lyra was faster. She grabbed a stick from the ground and slammed it against his leg. It didn't break him, but it knocked him off balance. "Run," Jalen shouted, but Lyra didn't run. She stood between Jalen and her old master. "I'm not the girl you broke," she said, voice steady. "I remember everything you did, and I survived all of it." Kraz raised his arm to strike, but Jalen tackled him from behind. The two men fought hard. Fists, kicks, blood. Kraz was stronger. Jalen was smarter. He pulled the emergency shield and activated it around Lyra. "Don't move." She watched in horror as Kraz slammed Jalen into a tree. Then the unthinkable happened. Kraz drew a long blade. Lyra screamed. Jalen raised his arm just in time. The blade cut through metal, but missed his heart. He collapsed, bleeding. Kraz turned to Lyra, laughing. "Now come home." But Lyra didn't cry. She didn't beg. She picked up Jalen's weapon. Her hands no longer shook. She looked Kraz in the eyes. "I told you, I'm not afraid." She fired once, then again, then a third time. Kraz fell, hard, and didn't move again. Lyra dropped the weapon and ran to Jalen. Blood covered his side. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Please, stay." He smiled weakly. "Told you, you were stronger than you think." She cried, not because she was afraid, but because she loved him. The next day, the sun rose over a burned valley. Lyra buried her past under the soil. She carried Jalen back to the ship and treated his wounds. For days, she didn't sleep. She stayed beside him, feeding him, speaking to him, reminding him he wasn't alone, and finally his eyes opened again. "You stayed," he whispered. She smiled through tears. "You saved me. I'm not going anywhere." She was once a slave. Then, she became a survivor. Now she was something more. A protector, a wife, and a warrior with a name that meant freedom. The galaxy didn't notice when Lyra was freed. It didn't care when she learned to smile. But when news spread that a former personal slave had married a human and killed her master, everything changed. On the planet of Zareth 4, in a shimmering tower made of glass and metal, the Council of Species met in secret. They were not used to change. Power had rules and rules had walls. But now, a slave had broken those walls. She must be taken, hissed one elder. She broke no law, said another. She married him. A slave cannot marry a free man, snapped a third, especially not a human. They all looked at a screen, showing Lyra standing tall beside Jalen, wearing no chains, no fear, and a ring on her finger. One word echoed in the room. Danger. On a quiet moon far from the eyes of power, Lyra helped Jalen walk again. His wounds had healed, but the pain still lingered. She supported him with each step, her arms strong, her eyes focused. You could have left, he whispered once. I did leave, she replied. I left the girl they broke. I came back as me. They lived in silence for some weeks, but silence does not protect you when you've become a symbol. One morning a ship landed outside their valley. Not black, not cruel, white, clean, marked with the flag of the Intergalactic Witness Guild. A woman stepped out. Human, kind eyes. Her name was Mara. I'm here to speak to Lyra, she said gently. Jalen tensed, but Lyra nodded. Inside the cabin, Mara placed a small hollow disc on the table. It projected thousands of names, slaves from across the stars. These people, Mara said, need hope, and you've given them that, whether you meant to or not. Lyra looked at the names, her heart aching. Some say what you've done is illegal, Mara continued. But others, they're calling you a hero. I'm not a hero, Lyra said. You killed the man who owned you. I didn't do it to be brave, she whispered. I did it because I wanted to live. And now, Mara said softly, others want to live too. Days later, messages began arriving, encrypted, whispers from dark corners of the galaxy. A broken miner from Drax 2 sent a voice file. I saw what you did. My daughter was taken. You gave me strength. A freed boy from the factories of Huron 9 wrote, I told my mother, one day I'll marry someone who respects me like Lyra. A ship captain, once a slave himself, sent a gift. Safe passage tokens. Good for travel in 8 sectors. You've earned them. Lyra read every message, and one night she stood before Jalen and said, I can't be silent anymore. He nodded. Then speak. They went to a neutral planet, Corella, home of the Free Species Accord, a place where stories were traded like currency, and every voice was heard. Lyra walked up the steps of the Grand Hall. Jalen walked beside her, limping slightly but proud. Cameras turned. Reporters stared. Soldiers tightened their grips. She was still the violet-skinned girl once sold as nothing. But today, she stood like a queen. I was not born to be a slave, Lyra began, her voice echoing in the hall. No one is. I was taken, bought, used, forgotten, she paused. But then, one person saw me. Not as property, but as a person, a soul, a name. She held up her hand, showing the simple silver ring. This is not a chain, this is a bond, chosen, free, equal. Gasps filled the room. She pointed toward the cameras. You are not what they called you. You are more. We all are. Jalen stepped forward beside her. This is not just her story, it's a beginning. The galaxy didn't change overnight, but something shifted. New laws were discussed. Old chains began to rust, and deep in the darkest places of space, the enslaved whispered a name like firelight, Lyra, in their ship, flying once more through the stars. Jalen turned to her. You changed the galaxy. Lyra smiled. No, I just remembered who I was. The galaxy just listened. They held hands. Together, free. The stars outside Lyra's ship looked brighter than before. Not because the galaxy had changed, but because she had. The girl who once knelt in chains now stood before thousands, with her chin raised and her soul burning like starlight. She had no army, no empire, but her voice had become a fire. Lyra and Jalen were now invited to many places, peace councils, resistance meetings, hidden networks of those who still lived in shadows. Everywhere they went, someone whispered, "She was a slave, and now she's free. She killed her masters and married a human. If she can speak, maybe I can too." One day they received a call from the planet Tarnock 5, where young slaves were still used in the mines. The message came from a child. "Please, they beat my sister. She can't walk. Can you help us?" Lyra didn't wait. She and Jalen landed on the dark world the next night. The mine was guarded by mercenaries, brutal and proud, but Lyra walked in without armor, only with a cloak and the memory crystal she once whispered her name into. "I'm not here to fight," she said loudly. "I'm here to show you who I am." One mercenary laughed. "Who cares who you are, woman?" Jalen stepped beside her. "That was your first mistake." And from the sky, dozens of ships arrived. Captains, traders, and rebels who had once been slaves, now flying free because of Lyra's story. No battle was needed. The guards dropped their weapons and ran. Lyra found the girl in a dark corner of the mine, her legs broken, her body thin, but when she saw Lyra, her eyes lit up. "Are you really her?" the girl asked. "The slave who became a wife?" Lyra knelt and took her hand. "No, little one. I'm the woman who never gave up." She carried the girl out herself, whispering, "You'll walk again. I promise." That night, around a campfire outside the mines, Jalen asked her, "Do you remember who you were before all this?" Lyra looked at the stars. "I was a shadow," she said. "Now, I'm light." The galaxy moved slowly, but it did move. Some species called her a threat. Some called her a saint. Some tried to silence her, but more tried to follow her. In secret places, small fires were lit. Memories were shared. Chains were broken. One morning, years after their journey began, Lyra and Jalen stood on a large open field on Earth. Yes, Earth. They had returned at last. Thousands had gathered. Children ran with wooden rings on their fingers. Aliens and humans stood together under a banner that read, "From Chains to Stars." The Lyra Accord. It was the first galactic law to ban personal slavery across all 10 major systems. Signed, sealed, and sparked by a girl once sold like property. An old ambassador asked Lyra, "What made you stand up when no one else did?" She smiled. "I didn't stand up alone. Someone reached down and gave me a hand." She looked at Jalen, who smiled beside her. "And then I learned to walk, then run. And now, I fly." That evening they stood together on a small hill as the sun set behind Earth's mountains. Lyra held Jalen's hand. She whispered, "I still hear their voices. The ones who hurt you?" She shook her head. "The ones who believed in me. The ones still waiting for their own names." Jalen kissed her forehead. "Then we'll keep going." She nodded. Because this story wasn't just hers. It belonged to every soul who had ever felt lost, to every voice that had been silenced, to every dream that had been stolen and then rebuilt. Lyra was once a personal slave. Now she was a name written in history, a wife, a warrior, a voice that traveled from chains to stars.